We have Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union at NTU.org. It's at NTU.org on X, but if you want to get to the website, it's NTU.org. NTU.org. Brandon, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm glad you're here. We have a few things to dive into. First off, let's just talk about the shutdown. Oh, woe is me. I haven't noticed any direct impact to my life because the government shut down. I do feel bad for the soldiers and airmen and anybody else who's on active duty or reserve that is not getting paid. But that is why you're advised to keep an account at the credit union and have your direct deposit from the military put there, because you can sign up for paycheck protection and get paid through a shutdown in the unlikely event that the government shut down while you're on active duty. So tell us what we're supposed to think and feel about the shutdown dragging on.
Well, I think we can feel bad for innocent men and women in uniform and even federal employees who should be probably getting a paycheck now. But at the same time, we can think that the shutdown is certainly a foolish endeavor. That funding the government is one of the most important things that Congress does, and they can't seem to get their act together. And we can point the finger, I think, in the appropriate place here. The Democrats in the Senate right now will not pass a clean CR. This is one of those bills that seems like a no-brainer to any casual observer, but for some reason they have decided that this is where they're going to plant their flag and fight their fight. And the people caught in the crossfire here, of course, federal employees, including our military. And that's really unfortunate here, because I just don't think that they're arguing from a point of appropriateness or level-headedness right now.
Yeah, and this is all brought to us courtesy of the Democrats. But while they're doing what they do, we have some pretty unbelievable things that Russ Vought is able to do over at the Office of Management and Budget. I even saw the Democrats go so far as to complain that OMB isn't losing any staff, but Russ Vought is making cuts to other areas of government. Why should he cut anyone out of OMB? They don't explain why they feel he should cut anyone there.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I don't really love the idea of using firing of employees as a political cudgel. I think I support the work of DOGE, and I support a lot of what Russ is doing. And I think we ought to make the government as small as we possibly can, eliminate all the positions that are unnecessary, that aren't benefiting the American taxpayer, cut those positions because they shouldn't be there. Don't cut them necessarily as part of a political war. So we should be cutting down the size of the federal government. And then, like I said, we've taken a lot of the steps in that direction with DOGE and Russ's work already. But let's do that job because it's the right thing to do, not because we're trying to necessarily put more pressure on Chuck Schumer. I think Chuck Schumer is losing this fight as it moves along, because so many members of his conference, so many Senate Democrats right now, are really worried about the impacts that this shutdown has. And it does have broad economic impacts besides just Washington, D.C. There's federal employees all over the country. And as those people are not paid, it does affect local communities. The sandwich shop, the barber, and so forth see reduced economic activity, and they end up taking a hit too. So I'd like to see the federal government much smaller, but I also want to be careful the method by which we're firing federal employees.
Yep. I don't want to seem gleeful about it, but the Democrats have been very effective filing lawsuits and using lawfare to prevent the executive branch from being able to do their job, which is what they were elected to do, which is right-sizing government. Americans knew President Trump planned to draw down the size of government, and they elected him anyway, overwhelmingly. And so the Democrats trying to stop him from doing that is actually going against the will of the American people. That's fine, but now that there's a chance to, actually do a few things, that's what's happening. And they're really going to have to work hard to try to help people understand their position, because they have not yet cogently explained why the government should remain shut down, other than they would like health care benefits and rights for people who are in the country illegally. That's not a good reason to shut down the government.
No, I mean, like I said, I think they're acting very rationally here. Listen, they created Obamacare back in 2010. And they didn't include some of these health care benefits that they now are fighting over, trying to shut or actively shutting down the government for. They had another bite at that apple. When Biden was president, he had a Democratic Congress, and not once but twice they passed Democrat-only reconciliation packages. They spent trillions and trillions of dollars first on the American Rescue Plan Act, which enhanced these Obamacare healthcare tax credits. Again, they followed up with that, the Inflation Reduction Act a year later. Big enhancement of those credits once again, but now they're scheduled to expire. They're holding their breath and stomping their feet and saying, even though we had 3 opportunities to make these credits permanent, we decided not to. We chose windmills and electric vehicles during the Inflation Reduction Act instead of these healthcare tax credits, which they now say are absolutely essential or people are going to be dying in the street. If they were so important, why weren't they as important to them back then when they made conscious policy decisions to allow these to sunset after the COVID emergency was over, which is where we are today?
Well, we'll just have to go day by day and see how long the Democrats plan to hold the country hostage. And that brings us to the next point of contention. The Obamacare subsidy, also known as the premium tax credit. I know we've talked about this before, and over on the TV side on Salem, and then also here on this program. But I would really like you to give us, just give us the Cliff's Notes for anyone who's not aware of the Obamacare subsidy or premium tax credit, so they can understand what's at stake here.
Yeah, this is the plussed up credit that I was referencing here. It's a subsidy that's provided to people who are participating in the Obamacare exchanges. And the Obamacare exchanges, of course, were meant to provide insurance to people who were either too poor, not poor enough to get Medicaid, but too poor to get health insurance on the individual market, couldn't get insurance through their employer for whatever reason. And, health insurance is super expensive. We've seen health inflation increase at a rate far outpacing regular inflation, even when regular inflation during the Biden administration was through the roof. And then during the COVID emergency, they plussed up the credits even more, and they removed the eligibility criteria in a lot of ways. So before it used to be means tested, which means if you made too much money, you no longer got that tax credit because you can afford insurance on your own. Well, guess what? We removed that during the COVID period. Democrats did. And all of a sudden, we have taxpayer benefits going to people making $500,000 a year. That's what they're fighting over right now. They're trying to preserve credits for people that are making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. These benefits have become so lavish that the Wall Street Journal documented this. People are leaving their employer's health insurance and going into the taxpayer-funded Obamacare exchanges because it's cheaper, because they don't have that payroll deduction where they're paying for their health insurance through their employer-subsidized plan. Now it's cheaper for them to get health insurance subsidized by the federal taxpayer. And I don't blame them if that makes sense for them, especially at a time when so many people are struggling to make ends meet. But that's not right. We need to fix that. We need to deny these increased Obamacare COVID-era subsidies that are going to wealthier people and make sure we're restoring Obamacare, making Obamacare as small as we possibly can, especially with regard to people who don't need it.
Man, I tell you what, if they're not fighting for the criminal illegals or for health care for the illegals, it's for subsidies for families that make, this is the top 1% of income earners in the U.S., right? I mean, these are people who don't need Obamacare subsidies. They don't need subsidies for their health care. They have plenty of disposable income to meet their high cost deductible, to fill up their HSA. I mean, this is not a problem for families in that income bracket.
Right. And I'm never one to bash the rich. I celebrate people who do well financially. God bless them. Go out there and make as much money as you can. But at the same time, the taxpayer should not be subsidizing those individuals. Taxpayer benefits should be reserved for only people who are the neediest Americans who can't work, who can't find insurance on their own for whatever reason. If people have the ability to work, then we should not be subsidizing their insurance unless they're actively going out there and finding work. That's one of the major changes that was made during this one big, beautiful bill with regard to Medicaid. We're no longer subsidizing the insurance of people who are playing video games in their basement, opting not to work even though they could if they chose to. And it's a pretty generous description. The Democrats have demonized these changes. But all you need to do is go out there, work, look for work, go to school, or volunteer. You can volunteer for 20 hours a week. So go to your church, go to your synagogue, go to your local soup kitchen and help out society, be a contributing member of society, and then you're eligible for Medicaid benefits. But if you're sitting in the basement again playing video games and watching Netflix, I'm sorry, but taxpayers should not be picking up the tab for your health insurance. That just doesn't make sense.
I mean, first you go borrow $300,000 for an education, then you get out, go to your parents' fully finished lower level in their multi-million-dollar home, and hang out there and collect Obamacare subsidies. we just the rest of us are working. We have jobs. We're out here working for a living and getting charged extra when we go to the hospital to cover the unpaid medical bills, I should say, of people who are in the country illegally.
Yeah, it's such a mess, and I think we're looking at a much broader financial problem right now. And we talk all the time about the $37 trillion national debt, the fact that we're spending more on interest payments on the national debt than we are on our national security. That's an enormous problem. We can't continue to spend $1 trillion just financing our national debt. That doesn't make any sense. The other financial crisis that I'm alluding to here is the fact that we have such elevated levels of consumer debt. People have trillions of dollars on credit cards right now, over I think $1.3 trillion collectively on credit cards. And a lot of people are really struggling to pay off those bills because interest rates are elevated. And now you mentioned those people that collected $300,000 in student debt that aren't using those degrees to make a living where they can pay off that debt. We're seeing delinquency rates on student loans absolutely skyrocket. That's a huge problem, not just for those individuals, of course, whose credit is being completely destroyed, but it's a much broader problem. When those people's credit scores get tanked, they're not going to be able to go out and buy a house, go out and buy a car. So are those going to be permanent members of the welfare class where we're going to have to subsidize their insurance? We're going to have to subsidize all sorts of things, food stamps, all of those housing benefits, goes on, if they are just absolutely shooting themselves in the foot here by not getting jobs, by not paying off their student debt, by not being fiscally responsible. It's something that we ought to be thinking about here.
Yes, we should. So the other issue that we have is, the shutdown itself highlights, obviously, the founders. They had a vision. They wanted government to be slow. They wanted us to have to compromise, with one side with the other. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why they did it this way, but at the end of the day, having a government shutdown whenever the Democrats just want to throw a temper tantrum because they lost, it kind of makes you question the system.
Yeah, the system doesn't work great all the time, but it's the best system that any country has ever invented. So, we'll stick with it, even though we shake our fists and get really angry from time to time for a good cause. One of the things that National Taxpayers Union we've supported for many years and continue to support is a bill called the Preventing Government Shutdowns Act. This is bipartisan legislation, but it's spearheaded right now by James Lankford, a senator from Oklahoma, Republican, and Jody Arrington, a House member, Budget Committee chair in the House, another Republican. And what it would do is basically when we have these temper tantrums, when Republicans and Democrats can't agree to do their basic responsibility and fund the government, you have an automatic continuing resolution, which is just a short-term funding patch. It just keeps the government doors open, allows the government to continue to function, takes kind of that pressure that often builds on members of Congress, and more often than not, result in overspending, these pork-filled omnibus legislations that are really a disservice to taxpayers. So we'd like to see that bill enacted into law. I think the president would sign it if it made it to his desk, but once again, this is something that Democrats are holding up and preventing from making it through the Senate. So we'll cross our fingers. We'll keep working on it, even though it does have some bipartisan support. It doesn't have quite enough, but that would, I think, bring a lot more in the way of adult conversations into this conversation, instead of the temper tantrums and holding my breath till my face turned red mentality that we've gotten of late.
Yep, but then What good does it do, right? I mean, we've all been there. I'm just not going to talk to you anymore. And the other person is like, okay. No response. It's just, okay. You've lost. You've lost because the
Turning
person is
into
not having a
marital
reaction.
conflict.
Yes, it's turning into like the Real Housewives. But it's the Democrats, and they're not all wives. Some of them are husbands. But your point is well taken, and we need a functioning government. But if they insist on shutting it down, it does give President Trump and Russ Vought the opportunity to furlough unneeded federal employees that would have taken the offer, the buyout, but they didn't because their union told them not to. There are really a significant number of federal workers who probably would have been very happy with the buyout. It was so generous, but they didn't take it because the union told them not to, and they might have regrets now. And now they'll be furloughed without the opportunity to have the extra pay. And, there was a lot of really lush benefits in there. And I feel bad for them because they were led astray about that. Is there anything that you know about the layoffs so far, the furloughs, that you can share with us?
Well, I mean, there's furloughs, which are situations where they're not paying government employees, but they eventually are going to come back by and large. And back in 2019, after the last major shutdown, Congress passed a bill that was signed into law that basically said if you get furloughed, if you have a period of time where you're not being paid, even though you're working, or even if you're not working, if you're staying home, the government will make you whole for that. So furloughs are just kind of a pause in payments, and it ends up being a bad deal for taxpayers at the end of the day. What I'd like to see is pink slips, people who simply aren't providing value to the federal government. We need to dismiss those people. The federal government, as we all know, has gotten far too large, far too bloated. There's a lot of people that are participating in the workforce there because it's a jobs program, not because they're serving a function. And that's not to disparage the entire federal workforce. There are plenty of people who are doing a good job of, processing Social Security applications, making sure Medicaid payments go out when they're supposed to, and so forth. But we all know there's way too much bloat in the federal government. And I think we've started the process with DOGE of winnowing down the fat, getting rid of the employees that are playing Minesweeper or checking their fantasy football scores instead of doing the people's business. But there's obviously a lot more work to be done there. And if this is the continuation of that work, that's great. But I don't think we should necessarily have a shutdown because of this. This should be happening whether there's a shutdown, whether there's not a shutdown. We should be cutting the fat, trimming the waste, and making government as efficient as we reasonably can.
Yep, as we reasonably can. I love the way you put it, because I'm not actually looking for, we'll just cut 50% of the workforce. That wouldn't work, right? We're not looking for extremes here. I think President Trump's plan to go in with DOGE and to make cuts, it was derailed to such a degree that now they have to kind of pick up where they left off. And all of it has been so discombobulated because we have, as you mentioned before, it's unwarranted, disproportionate pushback from the Democrats on things they actually ran on. I don't have it ready right now, but if we wanted to, we could play all of the video of President Clinton and especially President Biden, Obama. President Obama, when he set up U.S. Digital Services Agency, he said that the government computers couldn't even communicate with each other. And he also talked about drawing down some of the government. He said we needed to, basically replace some of the functions with automation, but we couldn't because many of the government agencies can't communicate because they're on different computer systems, and some of them date back to the floppy disk. And so he set up U.S. Digital Services Agency. So Trump comes in to try to do an extension of what Obama started but didn't really finish, and gets hamstrung with lawsuits and every other thing under the sun. And now we have this temper tantrum. And so if you're a Democrat, I challenge you to explain, just reconcile it in your mind, why it's okay for Obama to cut government and set up U.S. Digital Services Agency, but it's not okay for Trump to take U.S. Digital Services Agency, relabel it DOGE, and do the same thing that basically reconciling government systems and trying to update systems and cutting things that aren't right and auditing things, that it's okay for Obama to do that, but it's not okay for Trump to do that. And now we have to shut the government down to basically argue for health care for illegal aliens. None of this makes sense. What does make sense, though, is that you go to ntu.org and find out more about National Taxpayers Union, because you're a taxpayer, so you might want to know what they're doing over there. It's good stuff.
Well, I appreciate that, Stacy, and please check out our website, check out our writing, our clips on wonderful shows like this in your television show. And we always love to hear back from taxpayers about what is, causing them the most grief right now. Is it the IRS? Is it, what's happening with the shutdown, or whatever's on your mind? We love to hear from folks.
Well, stick with me here on the radio show. That's where our focus is now, and we would love to have you back to talk more. Thank you so much for staying up with us tonight, Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President at National Taxpayers Union. Good to see you.
Thanks, Stacy.
All right. Have a good night.